Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Stealth Hitch rack receiver on a 2023 Mercedes-Benz GLE 53 AMG. Now this is going to be available in two different kits. One of them is only going to allow you to have a receiver that's going to have the capacities to hold a bike rack or cargo carrier, and the other one's going to be the towing kit, and that's going to allow you to tow a trailer and also include a 7-pole as well as an adapter for 4-pole and all the wiring necessary to legally pull a trailer. The rack receiver is going to be completely hidden once you're driving around, but when you're ready to put your accessories in place, you'll have this 2-inch by 2-inch receiver block that's going to go in here and then allow you to be able to get those accessories around. Now this has a decent capacity at 600 pounds for tongue weight rating, and that's going to be, you know, bike racks and cargo carriers, which is a decent amount of weight. Now as I pop this out, you'll notice there's a large sticker that says not for towing, and that's because this is only going to be used on those accessories. You don't want to put a ball mount in here. So if you are planning on pulling that trailer, when you get the towing kit, not only do you get that wiring, but you're going to get a nice ball mount here with a B&W ball, and this will pop in all the same. And then you'll be ready to tow that trailer, especially when you have that 7-pole wiring in here with a 4-pole adapter also included, so you'll be able to hook up to those trailers. Now with that being said, there's also going to be safety chain loops that are tucked back a little bit, and they are still going to allow you to get your standard S-hook or even a larger clevis style should be able to go on there. And I think the great part about this kit is being an AMG Mercedes, a hitch does kind of take away from the look of a car sometimes, and this is giving you the best of both worlds by being able to have it hidden, but also still have that usability. And with the ball mount and in the towing capacities, this is pretty impressive. It comes in with a gross trailer weight rating of 8,000 pounds. So you can pull some pretty heavy stuff with this. Something to consider though is you may need to pick up a brake controller, which this will help you get pre-wired for that. And then you also have a tongue weight rating of 800 pounds with this ball mount, which is pretty serious as well. So overall, this is going to allow you to tow some pretty serious trailers. Now, regardless of which kit you pick up, I'm going to show you how to get the hitch installed, and then the wiring will be additional. So if you're just getting the rack receiver kit, you can skip through that, but all of the steps to get the hitch in place are going to be there. And as far as the installation goes, I'm going to be real with you. German cars are very well put together. They are a little bit more difficult than a traditional American car or Japanese car to take things off of. And this whole fascia needs to come off, and that way you can bolt up where the bumper beam was originally placed with that hitch. So with that being said, this is something you're going to want to set aside a couple hours and maybe have an extra set of hands to help you throughout the process, and you may need some specialty tools. But go ahead and watch the video. If you're doing this yourself, you'll go step by step and be able to get it installed. But if you watch the video and decide this is beyond what you want to take on, that's okay. You can reach out to our dealer locator to find someone close to you to get this hitch installed, but watching the video may help you make that determination. So let's take a look at that. When it comes to getting our hitch installed, you'll find if you're following along with the instructions, it's going to cover quite a few different submodels, including ones that have 3rd row seating and some that don't. Ours today is an AMG with no 3rd row. And also we're going to be installing the towing kit, which is going to have all of the wiring. But if you're just doing the hitch for a bike rack or cargo carrier, all the instructions are going to be the same up until that wiring portion. But if you're doing the towing kit, we're going to cover the whole thing. So follow along. First step we're going to want to do is we're going to start pulling some of the interior out, and that's going to allow us to get the fascia taken off. And the hitch is going to bolt up to the bumper beam. So the good thing about German cars is they're very well built, but that means they're a little bit harder to take apart. So have some safe places to set things aside. That way they stay safe while we're doing the installation. So with the hatch open, we'll take our cargo area cover here, and we're going to get this removed and set it aside. Our next step is going to be removing this threshold, and it does again depend on which trim you have, but more than likely you're going to have some plastic caps that we're going to need to pop out, and that way we can gain access to the T30 Torx bit screws. So located on ours, you'll find I have 2 circles that are in this plastic, and there's just a small spot to where you can wedge either a pick or a small flathead screwdriver in here, and this will pop those caps open and get us to that hardware. And a 90-degree pick might be a good option here so you can hook it and pull out. My flathead, I could probably get this. It's kind of at a weird angle, so I might end up grabbing that pick. And you'll find that there's going to be 2 snap portions where it pops in. It's in there pretty good, so don't be surprised if you have to put a little bit of force, but you'll see that that's where we have our T30 screw. Now again, different models are going to have different amount of spots that you'll need to remove hardware. So I'll get mine popped out and we'll get those screws taken out. And something that I recommend is having a nice organized spot to keep all of your hardware, and that way when you reinstall, you'll have everything ready to go. If you could set it up step by step, it makes it a lot easier for the reinstallation. Once you have that hardware removed, we're going to pop this out, and it's just going to be a series of clips under here. So if you can get your finger wedged in underneath, as you just start to kind of pop this open, I always try to work on the outsides and then make my way in. So I'll get a few clips on each side popped out. And then the tail end is some of it might be underneath this weather stripping a little bit, so just kind of peel it back to where you can pull that out. And you'll see that we have the 6 clips that snapped in, so if you need to pry on any of them, you can kind of see roughly where they're spaced out. Sometimes a trim panel tool will help, but I was able to get this out fairly easily. Now we're going to work on these side panels, and attaching those side panels to the body of the vehicle is going to be the luggage hooks. So you have 4 of them total, 1 in each corner. And to get to that hardware, the plastic cap on there, you're going to want to pry that up, and that's going to give us access to the screw that's below it. So using that pick or a small flathead here, we're going to pry this to where we can gain access. And this one's in there pretty good. Originally it's molded at the top with a very small little bit of plastic there. So if you can pry from the bottom and work that up, that's going to be the best option for you. Now this is going to get a little bit tricky for some of y'all because of the hardware that they use here. This is an interesting Torx. To get those bolts out, because these are a Torx style where you'd need a socket for it, you can go out and get that 16mm socket. But throughout our whole shop, we don't even have that tool. So you can get away with a 12mm socket. Now I recommend using hand tools on this. You don't want to get too crazy and round it off. But if a 6-point seems to be the best, it'll kind of bite around that. And I found that this one wasn't terribly tight. So using the power tools, you run the risk of rounding it out. But we'll go to this one up here. I haven't loosened that, and it seems like this 12mm should work just fine. So we'll get all this hardware removed, and we're going to try to keep this all together. So as you remove those bolts, just keep it with those luggage hooks, and that way you'll have everything ready to go for later. With those hooks removed, we're going to need to gain access eventually to get the hardware off for our taillights. And so we need to pull these side panels out a little bit to gain access. So if you have these little luggage net here, you can just kind of pull that off, and there's a clip down here. I think if we get both of these pulled out, that should just drop down. And I think these clips, they should be okay. The main thing is that we could draw this in. So what I'll do is just reach under in this gap, and there will be more than likely a series of clips that are kind of holding this in place as well. So we're going to just draw this out. And with those clips, I'm just working my fingers up, and you can actually see the clip here. You can get your fingers behind it and just pull straight out to get that to pop. And then as you work your way up, you may find there's going to be a few more, which there is here. And you can see why I pulled that little luggage net out, because we want to just kind of pry this out so we can gain access. And we're going to be doing this on both sides. So you can see these clips here. That's where we're going to be working. Go ahead and get the other side popped out just like this. And if your passenger side looks like this, you can just take this panel out and set that aside. Now, there is going to be electrical components on this portion, so as you're prying it back, make sure you're not pulling too hard. We don't want to damage any of our wires during the installation process, but this should come out just like the other one. There we are. And if any of those clips pop off, which is very possible, just make sure you hold on to those and then get those back in place when you reinstall. Now the plastic cover that kind of goes over the tail light, we're going to pop that off, and it's going to be also a series of plastic clips. And I recommend, for prying purposes, a plastic trim tool. This will help prevent any scratches from occurring. But if you wedge this in, you'll see a bright green clip, and that's where it's kind of snapped in. So if you pry on that portion, we can get that to pop out. Again, if you drop any of the clips, just make sure you hold on to them. Don't be surprised. Sometimes they just slide back in. It's not a big deal. And if you do break them, again, they're not super hard to replace. You can generally go to an auto parts store and get one. So don't let that, ruin your installation. So just prying this back a little bit, we want to just make sure that we're able to slide that tail light out. So this should be plenty for us. And at this point, we're going to head in and get the hardware that's attaching the taillight in place. The taillights are held in place with 3 8mm nuts, and they're very small, and they're in a pocket where if you loosen it up and it falls off the stud, it falls into the abyss of the vehicle. So I want you to be very careful so you don't lose them. Otherwise, you're going to be hunting them down with a magnet. So what I recommend doing is, you'll see these spots here. These are where we're going to get the first two. And it's a stud that's fairly long, but the end is tapered. So if you loosen it up, I do recommend, I'm going to swap over to a ratchet and just use a hand tool here. And once you get to that tail end, if you're very gentle and pull that out and you have a magnet handy to get that, it's the safest way. Something else that's kind of curious is, this should be a straight shot. That is not the case. The holes are slightly off kilter to where this is going to be slightly at an angle to get to that stud. So just take your time here. The main thing is you don't lose those, and if you do, start getting out your magnet, and you can actually shoot through where we removed that threshold. There's some openings, and get that magnet to go in. So I dropped mine. It's very possible that you will, and so just kind of giving you a heads up here. So I'll get these taken out, and then we can work on that inside one. And these are not very tight, so I didn't even need a ratchet. I was able to do this by hand. So as I mentioned, I'm going to get this as far back as I can to where I know that it's just sitting on that stud. And then very gently take off my socket, grab my magnet, and we should be able to get that off. Just like that. So go ahead and we'll do that on both sides of the vehicle. And then the other stud is going to be on our driver's side here. You'll see there's this computer. If you go back right on this bump out, you're going to see that it's going to be similar nut size as to the ones that we removed. I'm going to just use a ratcheting wrench here because, again, they kind of blocked it to where it's not a straight shot with a socket. And the other side's going to be very similar. It's just not easy to get with the sockets. Ratcheting wrench seems to be the best option here. And again, they're not super tight, so if you want to, once you get it loose, you can use your fingers to get the rest of it taken out. On the passenger side, I did mention it's a little bit different. You can see where the light is shining through. So that's where it's going to be located. Same thing, I'd use the ratcheting 8mm to get to that because it's not a straight shot with a socket. With the 3 nuts removed on each side, the taillight should come out fairly easily. Just be careful, you don't want to cause any chips to your taillight, so slide it straight out, basically following the way that the studs were, and then we can get this unplugged. Now, if your vehicle, if you drive on some dusty roads or it just isn't very clean currently, sometimes these taillights can kind of stick into place, and so what I'll recommend doing is on the inside, you won't be able to really gain access to these, but if you push on this stud, that's going to loosen it up, and then you can draw it out. It'll make it a lot easier than having to pry. And then you'll just unplug, as you saw. I just pushed down the 2 tabs and get that separated. And now we can set both of our taillights aside. Head to each of the wheel wells, and the first spot we're going to tackle is going to be a screw that's a T15, and that's right where the wheel well trim goes from the rear fascia to the rear quarter panel, and it's just a small screw that's in this pocket. And if you look at the angle that I have the screwdriver at, that's about where you're going to attack it. So we'll get this out first. Very small, so be careful. And then there's going to be 3 plastic push pins. So there's one here, and as you work your way up, there's one it's kind of tucked behind this plastic right here, and then there's going to be one more as we work up right here. Now, they're very small, and so using a plastic trim tool like this, they recommend the 90-degree pick. These are not exactly easy to pop out, but what you're going to do is wedge on that center button and try to get a gap under there, and if you can pry that center out, it should remove it. I did have issues a little bit with it, just kind of rolling the edges of it, so get a good bite on it, and then as you pry out, you should be able to get the whole thing out. If not, if it separates like it just did, just make sure you have both of the pieces, and then just keep those contained. So work on those 3, and then there's going to be one more bolt that we're going to need to gain access to. Once you have those push pins removed, you can take the liner and just kind of peel it out from the plastic. And you'll see on that black plastic, this inset here, that's where a bolt is going to be located. Now, if you take your finger and run it straight back, there is like a pinch weld almost, but it's on the outside edge, and you might be able to feel the head of a bolt. And so in order to get to that, a thin walled socket, again, they kind of made this accessible, but it's not a great shot here. So I have a small extension with my 8mm socket. So we'll get that on the bolt. You're going to have to kind of blind fire it for a second. And then once you're on there, we'll get that removed. And then we're just going to repeat the same step on the other side of the vehicle. Head underneath your fascia with a 10mm socket, and right by the wheel we'll have 2 10mm bolts, and then on this bracket that goes right underneath the exhaust tips, it holds on the heat shield, there's going to be another one, and then as we go to the center, right under the diffuser, it's going to be right here, and then we'll just repeat on the other side, making it a total of 8 bolts. So we'll get these taken out. We're going to get ready to take our fascia off, and I highly recommend having an extra set of hands to help support this, not only to pry it off safely, but to also support it while there's probably going to be electrical plugs that we'll have to separate. And something I recommend doing, take some painter's tape and run this along the edge of the fascia and the rear quarter panel, and I'm going to put one on the upper edge as well. And this is just a nice, quick, easy way to prevent scratches along the paint while we pull this off, and also when we reinstall it. So we'll get this taped up. Now, to get this pried off, start on each edge by the wheel well, right where we remove that T15 screw. You can get your finger back there, and putting a little bit of pressure to open up the gap, and using a plastic trim tool, if you wedge that, there's some tabs that this kind of locks into. And so just kind of keep pressure, but you're trying to pry it down so you can get this portion popped out. And then the rest of it is just a series of clips that kind of snaps in. So just put pressure. I'm still holding back here, and that's going to help keep those popped out. And then once you get to the taillight section, this plastic portion, there's tabs that snap into there. They're pretty tight. And so what you can do is just wedge that trim panel tool or a flat edge here, and just on that black, try to push down and then keep pressure on the fascia to where you can slide that tab out. And it should make it easier for the other ones as you go along, but the main thing is keeping that pressure so it doesn't snap back in. And once you get towards the inside, you can kind of pull on this one as well. So we just have this holding here. And then with all those popped out, we'll just kind of loosen this up a little bit and make sure you have the other side ready as well. There's going to be more clips along this center edge, so it may take a little bit of pressure here to get this to pop off. So just make sure that you're pulling this out nice and wide here to where it's loose. Separate it from that heat shield, and that should help get this fascia taken off. It's also got a plastic clip on this plastic cladding on the inside, so if you can actually reach back and probably pinch it, but you'll see that they're all located here. So you might be able to get your fingers in there to just kind of pinch. This one's pretty tight, but just a little pressure pulling that back, you should be able to get those to snap out. And you may be putting a little bit of more pressure than you think here. These clips are pretty tight, but again, just kind of working your way towards them is going to help. Okay, and with those popped out, this is when having that extra set of hands really comes into play, because electrical connections, we're going to start here on the driver's side. And you'll see this one just continues on, so best thing to do is separate it from here, and you'll have a locking tab. You'll just pull that back, and some of these can be really tight, so if you have a flathead screwdriver, sometimes that'll make it a little bit easier. So get that lock out, and then push on it to separate, and then we'll have this one down here. We're going to do the same thing. We got one more plastic clip on this side, so I'll try to find that and pinch it. This tab right kind of below our clips, and this has a plastic push pin that's located back here, so pretty hard to get to, but you're going to want to remove that. So go ahead and use the same tools you used to pry those off, but it is located on this black plastic. If you kind of go a little bit low, it's right here. Sorry, Joe. One more electrical connection that's kind of hard to get to is going to be this block here where there's these small plugs in place. You'll see under here we have that plug. You're just going to pull on that locking tab, press that, and get it to separate. And at this point, we can set our fascia aside. Now we're going to remove our bumper beam, and we're not going to be reinstalling the bumper beam. The hitch is going to replace it, but the nuts that we take off, we are going to use. To get these off, it's just going to be an 18mm socket. We'll get these all taken off and then take that bumper beam down. You may need to kind of give this a bump with a dead blow hammer to get it loose. There may be some silicone or something holding it on. So we'll loosen that up, and that should slide out, and then we'll set this aside. Now with an extra set of hands, you'll probably need that just to kind of help get this hitch in place. It's pretty heavy. We'll just line that up over those studs, and then grab your hardware and just get a few started on each side just by hand to kind of keep that in place. It'll make it a little bit easier to get the rest of your hardware also hand tightened. And then we can snug these down. We're going to come back with a torque wrench to get them properly torqued, but just to save ourselves a little bit of wrenching away, we'll snug them down. Now we'll come back with our torque wrench in that same socket. Torque settings are found in the instruction manual, and this is definitely an important step because as you're using factory studs, you can over tighten it and cause damage to those. So this is going to make sure it's going to be tight enough, obviously, to be able to tow and use the hitch, but also it's not going to be causing any damage long term. Now, if you need a torque wrench, we have them available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. But we'll go through, get these all torqued down. Now this step is where it starts to divvy away from if you're doing just the rack receiver kit versus the towing kit. It's going to be very similar as far as how we get our receiver block in place, but if you have the towing kit, you'll have the safety chain loops that'll go in place as well as the bracket for the wiring. So things that I would recommend doing is your receiver block. This cap is to prevent any buildup from occurring in there while you're towing, but that's where they store the keys for it. And on your keys will be a 5-digit code, and you'll want to get that number and write that down on the sheet that's included with your hitch, and that way you have a reference. If you ever lose the keys, you can still get those from Stealth Hitch and be able to use your hitch. So the way that we'll get this in place, we're going to have the handle is going to be on the passenger side, and this is going to slide into place here. And then we have our safety chain loops, and these are going to kind of face towards the back. So what you're going to want to do is feed that handle in. Make sure you have these in the proper orientation. And sometimes it can be a little bit tight on this rubber cap, so don't be surprised if that's the case here. And these are going to go on the outside, but also if you have that wiring bracket, we're going to need to get that in place as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to sandwich this in place and get one bolt threaded through. That way it's going to support itself here. Go. We'll get our safety chain loop put back in place. Put that rubber cap through there as well. And then I'm just going to get the other one passed in as well. And then with the wiring, this is going to be where we mount up that 7-pull. This is going to slide over, and then we're just going to get we got our lock nuts. I'm just going to hand tighten those in place for now. And then we're going to be coming back with the torque wrench to get these torqued down properly. Now we're going to snug these down with the 15/16 socket and a wrench on the end. And we're going to come back again with a torque wrench here, but this is going to get us a lot closer than before. About dead apparently. Now you can adjust your torque wrench to the torque settings in the instruction manual, and then we'll get these torqued down. Now if you're doing just the rack receiver kit, after this, you're ready to start putting your fascia back in place, making sure that you plug everything in, get your taillights put back in. But if you're doing the wiring, this is when we start getting into that. So we'll grab our electrical components and then we'll start getting that all tied in. Now head over to your passenger side and you're going to find this grommet, and this is where we're going to be passing our wires from the inside to the outside and eventually to our plug. So we'll just cut off one of these. And to feed the wires through, it's going to be a little bit of a tight squeeze here, so I'm going to use a pull wire, and you might want to put a little bit of silicone spray in here, and that's going to help lubricate it to make it a lot easier to pass that through. Grab your harness, and you're going to unravel your wires, and you'll have the section that's going to be wrapped in this sheathing. This is what we're going to pass and eventually make our way to the plug. So the grommet is going to be, you can see once you cut it off, a little bit of daylight that's poking through. Now you can get the wires to feed through there. It's kind of tight, and so to make it a little bit easier on myself, I have an airline tube, but if you have anything that you can just feed through there, it makes it a lot easier to tape up those wires and have something that you can attach it to and pull it through. It makes it a lot easier. Now I'll just tape up our wires and just make sure you don't have any stragglers hanging off. It's going to make it a lot easier to feed that through. So I'll just tape these up. And now we can pull that through. And as I mentioned, it is pretty tight here, so just grab that sleeve and we'll pull it through until we reach the end of that. Begin attaching our wires to the factory wires to get our light signal to our plug. And grab a quick connect, a quick splice here. That's how we're going to be attaching these wires. And we're going to start with our green one. And the harness that we're going to be looking at, if you go to this portion along the inside, kind of where the taillight wire is, you'll see that it does have plastic Christmas trees that kind of hold it up tight. I would recommend popping those out. It'll make it a lot easier to make this splice possible. And it's going to be wrapped with some insulation tape. If you just make a small cut and peel that back, that's going to give us a lot more room to work. And we're going to be looking for the white wire with the green stripe. Now, there's obviously quite a bit of extra wire, so I cut off a little bit, but still left myself plenty to be able to get this attached. And if you've never used a quick splice, it's fairly easy. The lower boxed looking portion, if you just put that green and white wire in place, you should be able to kind of push down the center and it'll go in between those metal tabs. And then we'll just take our green wire and do the same thing. And then as we press this over and press down, it's going to push down on those metal tabs, and that's going to bite in, making contact with the metal. So if you just snap it over for a second, it'll hold it in place. And then I recommend grabbing a pair of channel locks and really squeeze it to make sure that it's making contact. Sometimes if you get a faulty signal, it's because these quick connects aren't exactly all the way pressed down, making metal to metal contact. So really give that a good squeeze, and that's going to be our first wiring connection. Our next connection, we're going to grab our brown wire, and we're going to be going off a different harness. So you'll see this whole fuse block, and the harness we're looking for is going to be this one. You'll see it's got a little loop here, and the wire that we want is going to be blue with a green stripe, and so that's going to be for our running lights, and so I got that in place. The next wire we're going to focus on is our yellow one, and that's going to be our left turn signal. So you're going to want to route this where we popped off the threshold. Generally is going to be a good spot. If you want to, just kind of leave it here for now. And when we put the threshold back in place, we'll make sure we just don't snap into that wire, but that's going to leave it nice and hidden, because when we tap into our wire over here, it's going to be similar like the other one where it has those plastic clips. If you pull that down, it's going to make it easier to gain access to the gray wire with the black stripe. So we got this one attached here. So now we're just left with a few more wires. Our red one we will not be using, and normally that's for a brake light signal, but this will pick up if there's signals going to the left and right, that it knows that it's going to be a brake. Now, this one I just spooled up. You can cut it, you can cap it, you can do whatever, but I'm just going to leave it like that. The next thing we're going to focus on is our white wire, which is going to be our ground. And we're going to grab our fork spade connector, and located on the passenger side, you probably noticed by now, I have a ground that's going to be right here. And we don't want to disconnect the ground and cause any electrical issues with the vehicle, so we're just going to loosen that up with the 10 millimeter, but making sure that it stays in contact. And then we'll strip back our white wire, and we can slide this fork spade in place and then tighten it back down. So cut off the extra wire. Just make sure that you can get to that ground, without having too much tension, and cut off the excess. We'll then strip off the end. And then when we crimp this down, I always recommend making sure that it's on there properly. So we'll just give it a quick tug after we crimp this. And that's on there good. So now I'll loosen up that nut on the ground and get that connector in place. It looks as if there is a retainer on this, so it should actually keep that connection fine. So as I back this out a little bit, we can slide this behind, and that should make our connection. And with that tightened down, just make sure that this is in place, and we're good to go here. Our last wire is going to be our 12-volt power, and to gain access to where we're going to be tapping in, this fuse block is going to be coming off. So you'll see that there's a 10 millimeter bolt that's located at the top. We'll get that removed. And then there's a little tab at the top. If you just pry that up, make sure you grab that bolt. If you drop it, And now we're going to be able to get this separated. So there's going to be two T20s, and I believe we're going to be taking both of those off. And once you have those loosened up, what you can do with a small flat head is there's going to be tabs that kind of attach this in. So just separate this. So all these little openings will have those clips that you can kind of just pry on that and get this to separate. The main thing is we're just trying to gain access to this stud. So got this peeled back enough. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach our fuse holder to this portion, which is our 12-volt power. So what I'll recommend doing is grab this fuse holder, take the fuse out so there's no power going through. And we'll put our ring terminal over that stud. And there's a flange nut that's included in the kit. So instead of loosening that up, we'll just take the flange nut, put it on here, and we'll get that tightened down. Grab our black wire, make sure we have plenty of length. We'll cut this down and strip it back and then attach it to the butt connector that's on the fuse holder. We're going to make our way over to where our 7-pole bracket is located, and we're going to zip tie this up as we go. And there's a hole here on the outside that is going to make for a nice zip tie spot. So just kind of keep it taut enough to where it's going to stay away from the exhaust. And this is going to be plenty for our wiring. So instead of adding any more zip ties for now, we can start making our connection to our 7-pole. To get to the block to attach our wires, we have our 7-pole, and there's going to be the screws that hold in the block. So we'll loosen these up. And we should be able to pop this out. So if you push in from the inside here, we'll get this portion out. So what we'll do now, though, is slide this back. You can feed your wires in, and you can just put it as far back as you need to, because we'll slide it on later, but this will make sure that we have plenty of room. Now, this to kind of seal everything up, you're going to want to grab your screwdriver and loosen up this grub screw, and that's going to allow you to feed those wires in. And our wires, these are all going to get attached according to where they're marked. Now, the instruction manual is really good at this. It has it perfectly laid out, and if you follow that, it's going to be consistent with what I'll be doing. It's a nice reference. You'll find it right here. So if you're able to follow that, you use the slot keyway. We'll just be attaching the wires exactly like they have here. And to show you how to get them attached, what I'll do is I'll take the purple one, and we'll just strip back enough, about 1/4 of an inch, give or take, and we'll loosen up the block. So this one has just a screw. You'll back this out and feed the wire in, whereas the other ones have a plate, but it's going to be a similar concept. And you don't need to crank it down too hard. You really just want it to be able to hold itself and stay in place. If you really go too hard on it, you can actually, damage the wires. They'll be brittle and break. So we have that one attached, and again, your slot keyway is going to be kind of your reference point to follow. So just have it laid out and then follow that picture. So with those all in place, as I was doing it, you'll notice that a lot of the colors seem to be similar, but not all of them are. So there's molded colors on here. Do not follow that. Follow the instruction manual, and then when you have it all attached, everything's nice and tight, this keyway is going to go in the 6 o'clock position on our plug. So it should only slide in one way, but we'll pull this back until it sits flush and just guide that keyway kind of at that 6 o'clock position. And it should sit flush in there. Now once you have it at that point, we're going to put in our screws to hold that in place on the side. And then on the back here, before we tighten it down, I'm going to take some of that sleeving and just kind of make sure that that's tucked in that white area, because once we tighten it down, that's going to create a nice seal to make sure that water's not getting in there long term. And we can get this mounted up. So there's a slot in that 7-pole mounting point, and you can just slide that through, and we'll get our plug in place. And so getting this to a spot where we can obviously get our plug in, we want to make sure that we have this in the proper orientation. And so I'm going to say that we're going to put it with the cap facing towards us. That way we can get our plug in. It should still open up enough for us to be able to plug everything in. So there is hardware included to get this mounted up. Now that we have everything wired up, we need to test to make sure that it's working before we get everything put back together. So we'll take our fuse, we'll put that in our fuse holder, and we can cap that up. And then we also need to plug in the taillights for this to work. So we're going to just loosely plug them in and kind of keep them in place. And as far as testing goes, you'll have someone run through the light signals, and you can use a multimeter. They'll have the instructions laid out on how to do that. I have a 7-pole tester. Another way you can test is if you have your trailer available close by, you can run through those signals, check the lights on the trailer, and everything should be working. So I'll get our 7-pole plugged in, and I'm going to hop inside. I can see it already lit up, which is good. That means we have 12-volt power. The rest of it is just going to be doing our running lights, our turn signals, and brake lights to make sure that it's working. You may be getting some errors on your vehicle of left brake lamp or right brake lamp. What I recommend doing is start the car a few times on and off until it goes away. Sometimes it's just kind of relearning itself as you had to unplug it. But once you get it to a point where it's not throwing any of those errors, you can then start with your running lights. We'll do our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. I got everything cleaned up and roughly how it should look, or the ways that you can mount everything. And really, I just tried to zip tie up wires to where it looks nice and, it's not a rat's nest. And our module, there's double-sided tape, and you can use that to stick it into this pocket as well as the extra red wire. And if you're wondering what the blue and purple wires are for, those are going to be for a reverse surge brake or a brake controller. We are not putting a brake controller on this vehicle. They're not going to be towing a boat trailer with it. So at this point, we're just going to leave it bare. And if they ever wanted to add that in, that is there. So with that tucked in, I got all these wires put back in. At this point, we're ready to start getting everything put back together. So it's going to be essentially the reverse order. Just remember with this yellow wire, kind of get this tucked in when you put that threshold in. Make sure you get everything plugged in properly. So really just the reverse steps that you got everything taken off. You can now start putting it back together. Now the flats are going to be there for you to put a large wrench on. It's just going to keep it straight. It really isn't going to do a whole heck of a lot. It just looks a little bit better as a finished product. And to get this torqued, I'm using an 1.5 inch socket and a fairly high torque setting here. So you may want to 2-person this one, but this is going to be obviously pretty crucial to make sure that long term the ball mount's going to be solid enough and torqued down properly to be able to tow. Now you don't have to do it on the vehicle. You can also put it on a vise, and that works pretty well too. You may want to put some towels down on the vise to make sure it doesn't scratch it up. But this is also a method that you can use. Now refer to your instruction manual, because depending on the trim level that you have, the fascias are going to be slightly different on the bottom, and we are going to be trimming this out so we can obviously gain access to our hitch. And I've taped ours out, and being an AMG, if you have this diffuser style, it's going to be very similar, and the tape just kind of gives me a nice clean line to follow. You can use a Dremel. I use a multi-tool here, which is really nice to get nice clean lines. So we'll get this trimmed out. Once you have that cut out, you can go back with a file and just clean up those edges. now you can get your fascia put back together. So we'll get ours, Now with that trimmed out, you can go ahead and get your fascia put back together. Just make sure you have everything connected, that you unplugged, and just follow the reverse order that you took everything off. And that was a look and installation of the Stealth Hitch trailer hitch receiver with the towing kit on a 2023 Mercedes-Benz GLE 53 AMG.